I am Vero, and this is Modern Immigrant. Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Modern Immigrant. As always, so happy that you're here, ready to explore an immigration story. Thank you for joining us. Remember that you can check out our Instagram at Modern Immigrant, where we're always sharing more info about our guests and each episode. And you can also check out our website, modernimmigrant.net, where we share more information about our merch, our book club, and all of the stuff that we are doing. Today, Sean is sharing his immigration story. Sean is originally from England, and he met in England one of my best friends, Diana, who was also in Modern Immigrant in season 2. And he has been able to experience the challenges that Diana had to experience in England. And now he is experiencing immigration in Mexico, in Monterrey, where Diana is originally from. So he's going to share the things that he has been seeing from the immigration system in England, also the things he's learning from being a immigrant in Mexico, the differences, the thing he's learning, and he's also acknowledging his own privilege on how things are playing out for him, which I think it's a really important point of view and perspective that we also need to explore and learn from. Sean also talks about having dyspraxia, which is also known as developmental coordination disorder, and how is that affecting him in his immigration process, in learning a new language, in communicating, in writing, because some of these things are a little bit challenging for him, especially when being in a new country. So Sean gave us a message at the end of hope and an amazing learning that I think a lot of immigrants can learn from, especially if you're doubting about immigrating, if you're doubting about jumping into this experience because you don't know how things are going to be. I think he talks about the importance of support, of having people right by your side, and just hope. So thank you so much for being here. Enjoy this episode. Don't forget to share if there's something that you enjoy, or if this was an episode that you learned something new. Tell me. I love hearing from you, and I love when I read your comments. If you're on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe in any of the podcast platforms that we're at. Also, I want to say thank you to each of you who have been donating to buymeacoffee.com Modern Immigrant. All of those donations, it can be small, it can be big. Any amount counts, and is supporting this podcast production, is the reason why we're still here. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you. And today I'm with Sean, a Modern Immigrant. I'm really excited that you are here, and I'm really grateful for Diana for making this connection. So welcome, Sean.
Thank you.
Is this your first podcast interview, or you have done others?
The first.
Nice.
I'm a little bit nervous.
I think everyone starts a little bit nervous, and then they realize that it's just a conversation, and I'm sure we're going to have a great time.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Sean, something that's very common in this podcast when we started this interviews is to ask, when did your immigration journey start? And I'm sure you have had different experiences as an immigrant, so we would love to hear, what those experiences have been.
Well, I guess it started when Diana left England. We weren't sure what was going to happen in terms of her coming back to Europe, just that it was going to be very difficult for her to do that, especially anytime soon. And so then we started thinking about whether I would come here and when. And initially, I was going to work until the end of August in England. And
what do you work on, so people get to know?
In England, I just washed pots.
Nice.
I've always worked in kitchens, and at times I've worked as a chef. In England, it's called a line cook.
Oh, cool.
But I always found that very stressful.
I bet.
Yeah, and that was mostly when I was living in Wales with my mother. But I'm from Sheffield.
Okay.
And that's where I met Deanna. And I moved back to Sheffield and started. At first, I worked collecting glasses at the bar of this vegan restaurant.
Nice.
And that was very fun, but I only got 2 days work a week. And I started doing that because I absolutely didn't want to work in a kitchen again, because
Yes.
the last job I had before that in a kitchen was very stressful. But then, because the job was only available at the weekends, I ended up having to wash dishes as well.
Oh, wow.
But then I started to realize that I really enjoyed being in a kitchen, just not doing all the high pressure work.
Right.
I liked being in the kitchen and washing the dishes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then, so I was planning to come at the end of August, and then I decided, because it was my birthday in July, that I would come 2 days before then instead.
Oh, wow.
And so the last couple of weeks before I left, I did 50-hour weeks at work.
That's a lot.
Which is the most I've ever worked in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And how was that decision to, like, was it difficult to make that decision? What was your kind of like your initial plan? Was to just go and visit? Were you planning you were going to stay for a longer period of time? Like, because it sounds like it was like your first time kind of visiting Mexico too, right?
Yes. So in the end, I think we decided, because Deanna was looking at applying for PhDs in Europe. She was looking to start in January. The idea was that I wouldn't need to apply for a visa if it was only for 6 months.
Okay. How is for a person that comes from England to travel to Mexico? That's kind of like, do you need a tourist visa? Or...
So I need a permit, which was essentially just filling out a form at the airport, and Deanna said they might interview me, because sometimes they do, but it was likely that they wouldn't, because I'm from England and I'm an English speaker. And that turned out to be the case. I filled out the permit online, so because I'm not very organized, and my handwriting isn't great because I've got dyspraxia. So rather than have to work out what to write, I had the form printed off, and then I filled it out. I filled out the permit on the plane just before I landed, and then I took it to the desk and they stamped it, and they gave me the card that comes at the bottom of the permit, which is my permit to stay for 6 months.
For 6 months. It sounds pretty easy, the process, for someone that wants to do like a visit to Mexico. It doesn't seem to be very complicated. Okay. So how was your experience arriving to Mexico and experiencing that culture? I'm sure you were able to experience some of the culture with Diana while you were meeting her back in England, but it's so different, right? It's definitely not the same as being in the country.
It's been quite intense, I guess. Yes. Monterrey is not how I expected Mexico to look. It's very big and very flashy. And a lot of it looks expensive.
What were your expectations? Because I think that's very interesting. I think we all move to another country or travel with a set of expectations that usually are not the same when we get there.
I guess the only traveling I'd done before this was I went to Nepal, and I guess I expected it to be similar in some respects, and it is, in that even though Monterrey is very big and some parts of it seem quite flashy, it also seems recently developed. It's more extreme in Nepal, but it feels sort of similar in that respect. And I guess I expected it to be more like that.
Yes. Yeah. And that makes sense. I mean, I think you use a very important word, which is intense. I think that's a really good way to kind of like put the experience of an immigrant those first few months, right? Like you're still fairly new and everything comes kind of fast, and it's a different culture, different language. How's your Spanish? Has that been a barrier?
It's definitely been a barrier. It's coming along very slowly. Because I have learning difficulties, it takes me a very long time to grasp new things in general. My issues extend to my communication skills, even in English. So learning a new language has been very difficult.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of the experiences of learning a new language once we're adults, it makes it so much harder, right, than when we were kids. So you're adding, right, like, and you're mentioning there's other stuff that makes it for you difficult. So I have to say that you're really brave on taking on that adventure, because I'm sure that, as you said, it's been a lot of different things, right? Yes. So it takes a lot of courage. What have been some cultural shocks that you think you have experienced?
I guess the thing that's seen the most different for me is the culture around working in Mexico.
Okay.
It was shocking for me to learn people in Mexico are expected to work almost all the time, and there's no regulated contracts or set hours, and there's a lot of pressure to do. It seems like workplaces in Mexico don't consider mental health in the same way as they do in England. People are expected to work a lot and to feel grateful to have work, even if it's making them unwell or making them miserable. It seems like people are reluctant to admit when they're sick or unable to do work, as it might cost some money or they'll be judged negatively for it. And it seems that that's quite problematic right now because we're in the pandemic. And if people are ill, they really shouldn't be going to work.
Right. Wow, you're bringing such an interesting point by talking about the work culture. I see some of that here in the US when, seeing the Latino community and other immigrants here, how we really live for work, right? And we have to be grateful, and you better don't even think about complaining, because you're given this amazing opportunity, right? But the work that you're doing is difficult, and as you said, we need to take in consideration mental health and physical health, and more during a pandemic. So I'm really glad that you're bringing this. That would have been for me a shock as well, like arriving to a country where that's not a value, I guess, like asking for help or realizing that you need to take a break, or right, like that has to be difficult. And this is, I think, a good point to talk about something that I feel like it is important to discuss as immigrants, which is our mental health, and which is the own struggles that sometimes we can have in adapting to a new country, right? So would you be able to speak to us about, your own challenges and how this immigration, living in a different country, can make those challenges kind of harder to deal with?
So I guess not so much when I was younger, but sort of in the past 10 years or so, a couple of people in my life have died, and I think coupled with the fact that I have dyspraxia and I have...
I would stop you. I would just want to stop you right there so you can share with us what's that, so we can learn from you.
Right, there we go. So that's great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dyspraxia is a learning disorder. It's sometimes called developmental coordination disorder. It affects my ability to organize things, as well as things like fine motor skills. So my handwriting is not very good at all. And all through school, I either had a laptop or someone to write for me in exams. It also affects my communication.
Okay.
I'm forgetful and clumsy at times. Learning new things can sometimes take a lot longer for me than other people. Living with this, at times it affects my confidence and can generate anxiety in social situations and in situations where I have to be organized.
Right.
In terms of being an immigrant, it made traveling here on my own very daunting, because I feel I was quite organized and prepared, and I flew from Manchester and stayed with my aunt and uncle for 3 days, and I was already packed at that point, and so I spent 3 days going through all my documents and making sure everything was ready, and even then I was still like anxious that I missed something or that I would lose something important between England and Mexico, and
That's difficult.
Quite intense.
And it's stressful and it's scary and it can be, it's as you're saying, it overwhelming. And honestly, I appreciate you talking about this and opening up about this, because I feel like a lot of the times, thinking about the people that are listening to the podcast and hearing different stories, and, sometimes they hear, all that is going well and the successes, and that's what we see on Instagram and on social media. But I really like to create a space where we can be honest about things that have been challenging, right? And also sending a message that if somebody's listening and is feeling unsure about maybe their own difficulties, that being an immigrant, immigrating, traveling can still be an option, right? It's just definitely it can maybe be difficult in certain areas, but it's something that I would like people not to shut off completely and think that that's not for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think you're sending us that message, right? Like, did you ever thought you were gonna do something like that in the past?
No, I mean, as I say, I went to Nepal, but I went with an NGO, so it was all organized, and the particular charity that I went with in England is renowned for safety and for planning expeditions and covering all their bases with regards to looking after the people who go on their expeditions. So I really wasn't traveling alone.
Right.
Ever. When I went to Nepal, there was, I guess, at least 60 volunteers who went.
A lot of support.
And then team leaders who were volunteers, but they were all trained and knew what they were doing. And that was traveling there. And then when we were volunteering in the villages, it was a group of 13 of us, including the team leaders. So I was never alone for the whole 2 months that I was there.
So this going to Mexico was your first time traveling alone?
Yes. Absolutely.
And so far too, like it's a long one. How long was the flight? Like you said you went to Manchester, but how was the whole journey?
So I think it left 3 p.m. in England on the 13th of July, which I guess was 9 p.m. in Mexico. And then I arrived on the 14th of July at 8 a.m. I flew from Manchester to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Mexico City, and then Mexico City to Monterrey.
That's such a long trip. Well, did everything went fine? Did you miss something? Like, how was the whole experience?
No, I think Mostly went okay. The only thing that went wrong is I bought new sunglasses that morning and then put them straight into my rucksack. So when I arrived, they were scratched.
Oh, okay. That was the worst. That's okay.
That was the worst thing that happened. So I did pretty well.
What a success. You made it. And that's really a long trip. Like, yeah, I mean, it's far, it's stressful, it's a lot. So I'm glad to hear that you made it. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really inspiring what you're sharing and what you're talking about. I also wanted to ask you, and I guess this is part of your experience as a migrant in Mexico, which, I think a lot of people sometimes, a lot of immigrants talk about discrimination and rejection when they arrive to the USA and they are, for example, from Mexico. Like that's a very common situation when some people might feel discriminated. And I do have to admit that a lot of people that might be listening would assume or think that because you're white and you come from England, you have no wishes in Mexico. But I want to ask you if that has been your experience or if you have experienced something negative or not as positive.
Well, so I was just talking with Diana about this because I was looking at the talking points and I really don't feel like I have experienced negative discrimination.
Okay.
Except I have noticed that people treat me more positively because I'm English and because I'm white. Very obvious that that's the case.
Wow. Yeah. I saw stuff like that. I'm from Venezuela, and I have seen people doing that with tourists, right, or people that come from other countries, which is sometimes crazy, right? That we would treat people differently in such a noticeable way, right?
Well, and it's like Diana said, I noticed at the airport there was Spanish speakers traveling to Mexico and submitting the same forms as me and getting interviewed and questioned about their stay, whereas she just gave me a stamp.
Didn't ask
Sent me
anything.
through. Yeah.
How does that make you feel, or how are those experiences kind of make you feel, or what do you think about that? Because I'm sure maybe it was something you were taken for granted before, right? Like people will be treated fairly, or I don't know. Has that been a surprise to you?
I think, especially with the way Diana had to leave England, it kind of made me ashamed of the attitudes where I am from. Because I was always raised to be very open and accepting, and especially recently, Brexit, it seems the negative attitude towards immigration in the UK is very loud and very vocal. Yeah, that coupled with the fact that Diana was basically forced to leave and she had no way to come back.
That's really difficult. And I think a lot of the times in relationships where one person is the immigrant and the other person is not, I think that's something really positive about immigration, right? That we get to teach another person or show another person our culture. There's a really interesting exchange. And sometimes there's some realizations, right, about our own cultures and our own countries in terms of how they treat or receive people. So, I'm sorry to hear that has been some of the experience. And I know, because Diana is one of my best friends, how difficult that was for her. And it's a reality that a lot of immigrants have to experience, and it's unfortunate. Why would you say that immigration is good?
I think being from England, even though right now the tone is the opposite. The stuff that I'm seeing, the vocal minority would suggest that the island overall has very negative attitude towards immigration. Britain is a very multicultural place, and a lot of my favorite things about British culture come from immigration and come from the fact that it's been an island that's been visited by so many different cultures for generations and generations. And I feel, especially with the UK's history across the world, that that's how it should be, because we've convinced so many people globally that we're such a great place to live that we should just be letting them live. I've always found it to be a positive thing. Yeah.
I like that. I think that's really beautiful and important, and something that we always need to keep in mind. I think the things we like, the things we use, the things we do, how affected are by other cultures and by other countries. I have two last questions. One is in the outline, and one is something I'm curious to hear, and that is, what has been your favorite thing about Mexico? The thing that you're enjoying the most, even if it's a meal or a cultural tradition, or I don't know. I'm just curious.
The food in general, like, it's interesting to me. That's another thing that England owes a lot to immigration, is when people from other cultures ask me about English food. Traditional English food is very boring because there's no interesting spices
flavors or
flavors that are naturally occurring in England, because it's just a cold little island off the coast of Europe. There's not much going on. So all of our food is imported from other places around the world. And so that's one of the things I love about Mexico, is a lot of their traditional food is very vibrant and diverse and delicious.
Yes. I think that's something that we all love from Mexico, even though I have never been there. The food that I get from Mexico here in Seattle is so amazing, and everybody tells me that it's 10 times better if I go to Mexico. So I can't wait to go.
Yes. I guess I liked what Britain calls Mexican food, but I never really tasted real street food from Mexico, and it's very, very good. And also I like ceviche, which is amazing.
Ceviche is the best. Do you think that a person that has no Spanish and they don't know any Spanish, and if they travel to Mexico and they don't have anyone that speaks Spanish, would they struggle, or you think it's easy to get around with English?
I think it depends, because I don't often go out alone because of my level of Spanish. But I think it seems like a lot of people do speak English, more than I would have thought. And I imagine if you go to places where there's a lot of tourism, the number of people who speak English would be higher.
Yeah, that's a great point. It definitely, I'm sure it depends on the area and the city. Great. So lastly, to finish this interview, which has been really amazing to get to know more about your experience in Mexico, I would love for you to kind of share a message, or what would you tell immigrants that might feel that, they're not ready to emigrate, maybe because they also have a learning disability, maybe they have another kind of disability, and they feel that, that they're unsure of doing it? Would you like to tell them something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was fairly nervous about emigrating, and specifically about learning Spanish, because it's difficult for me to learn anything, and also because I struggle with communication and it creates anxiety for me. Obviously, I have support here, which I guess is not going to be the same for everybody's case. But I think if I am able to do it and overcome my challenges, then I think probably most people would be able to. And if they really want to do it, then they should.
Yes, I love that message so much. I love that you share the importance of support and that having a support system and having the desire. I think that's already half of the way of the journey, having that desire and giving it a try, knowing that there's going to be people there to cheer you up and support you. So I'm so grateful that we had this interview. I'm really glad that I got to listen to your story. And yeah, thank you for being in Modern Immigrant, Sean.
That's okay. Thank you for having me. It's been nice.
I wish you the best in what's next in the next few months, and in best of the luck for Diana as well. Thank you so much.